Hello everyone and welcome back to AP Bio with AP Playground. Today we're going to be covering topic 8.5, Community Ecology. So we're going to be looking at diversity within a community, looking at Simpson's Diversity Index, and also exploring interactions between populations within communities. And our suggested scale is statistical tests and data analysis. 5B, use confidence intervals and error bars to estimate whether sample means are statistically different. So when we look at different levels of organization of species and animals and overall just the environment, we can see that a community is going to be a group of populations of different species living close enough to each other to interact. So we've talked about specific organisms, and then we discussed population ecology and population growth. But now when we're accounting for multiple populations of different species living in one area and close enough to each other in order to interact, then we've reached a community. And so we see interspecific interactions between different species that can be positive, negative, or neutral for a species, and they will cause the community to change over time. And we'll be looking at all these interactions later on in the video. And interactions will determine how each species accesses energy and resources because each species has its own needs, and so living together and finding a way to coexist is definitely going to be a part of community interactions. And the communities are often described in the number of species that are within the community, but also the number of individuals of each species. And now we're going to take a look at diversity. Alright, so now we are going to be measuring diversity. And here we're going to be counting diversity by taking a look at the species richness in a community, so the number of species, but also how much of each species makes up the total community. So obviously having more species within a community is going to lead to a more diverse community, but also having a more balanced amount of each species within the community is also going to lead to more diversity. Because if you have a lot of, let's say there are two species in the community and there's a lot of one and not many of the other, then within that species where there are a lot of members, there could still be competition for resources. And so when you have a more diverse community, that means there are more species that have different roles within the environment, different resources that they need to survive, and so there's less competition between them. And we'll discuss that more on the following slides. But here, we're going to measure diversity using Simpson's Diversity Index. And that's going to be the organisms in the species divided by all the organisms for each species squared and added up. So what this means here, as we look at this equation here, we see it's 1 minus sigma notation or sum notation, which means we're just adding up all the values here of the total number of organisms of a particular species divided by the total number of organisms of all species squared. And then this is done for every single species, and then that's added up and subtracted from 1. So we'll practice right now. Let's find the diversity of this community, where we have species A with 10 members, species B with 15 members, species C with 35 members, and species D with 40 members. So first up, we need to find capital M, the total number of organisms of all species. And adding up, 10 plus 15 is 25, plus 40 is 65, plus 35 is going to be 100. So we have a total of 100 organisms of all species within this community. And now we can set up our diversity index equation. It's going to be 1 minus, we have species 1, that's going to be 10 over 100 squared, plus, because remember we have to add up all of these values, 15 over 100 squared, plus 35 over 100 squared, plus 40 over 100 squared. And that's in parentheses because then it'll be subtracted from 1. So when we do this calculation, when we simplify all this math using calculator or your brain, we get 1 minus 0.315, which results in an answer of 0.685. And Simpson's diversity can range from 0 to 1, with 1 being the most diverse and 0 being the least diverse. So we have a fairly diverse population here with a diversity index of 0.685. So when we mention diversity lowering competition, we see that there's interspecific competition within a community, and this is going to be detrimental to both species involved. There's competition between two species because resources are in short supply. And what generally happens is the less reproductively advantaged species is going to be eliminated. The species that has the slight advantage reproductively is the one that is going to be able to get that resource, and the other species will not, and so it'll be eliminated, and this is known as competitive exclusion. And when we discuss about the resources that each species need, we look at the ecological niche, which is the sum of biotic and abiotic resources a species uses. So this can include water, space, food, territory, that kind of thing. And each species has both a fundamental and realized niche. And the fundamental niche is essentially the entire niche that the species could occupy, while the realized niche is going to be the actual niche that the species occupies. And so natural selection favors behaviors that lessens competition, and so niches are often partitioned. They're broken up, and both species will move to their realized niche instead of occupying their fundamental niche, but at the same time that means there's going to be enough resources for both species. So we can see here some examples of competition. This is over food. Here this is over water. Here this is also over food. And we can also look at realized and fundamental niche. So over here we see this Kthamalus fundamental niche, and that extends on the shore and also down into the ocean. It can live and survive and reproduce in these areas, this entire area. This is its fundamental niche. But because there's also a similar species, Balanus, that uses similar resources, there is now a realized niche that limits the space over here, because Kthamalus can live in both below and above the water, while Balanus is not. It could potentially not be able to do so. And so both of them are in their realized niche, living in a part of the environment where they can do so, but one is not. They're not in their fundamental niches. They're not taking up all of the resources that they could be taking up. Now we're going to discuss predation. And predation is going to be beneficial for one species and detrimental to the other. The predator, the species that kills and eats the other, is going to benefit. It's getting food, while the prey is losing its life. We also see herbivory, which is again beneficial for one, detrimental to the other, where the organism is going to eat a plant other than another organism. And prey has developed adaptations in order to get out of predation. So there's camouflage, so predators can't find them. Warning colors suggesting to predators that, hey, I'm dangerous. And also mimicry of other dangerous species so that they too appear dangerous. And we look at predator and prey cycles that end up regulating the size of both species. If we look here, we see a cycle of predation. We have the prey, this rabbit, and the predator, this fox. And what's going to happen is as the rabbit population grows, the fox population is now going to have more food to eat, so it's also going to grow. But as the foxes are eating rabbits, there are less rabbits, so rabbits are going to decline. And as a result of a loss of food for the foxes, fox population is also going to decline. So there's sort of these growth and declining cycles that ebb and flow and follow each other, and this could also be known as an oscillation. But essentially what happens is that through predation, the sizes of these two populations are kept in check. And we also see trophic cascades, where changes in one level of food web, which is the energy relationship between different species, can affect other levels. So for instance, over here, we see that we have our producers, our plants, and then they're eaten by the primary consumers, and then they're eaten by this wolf, this secondary consumer. But what happens if there's a change in the secondary consumer level? There are no more wolves to keep the population of the primary consumers in check, and as a result, the primary consumers are going to continue to grow and eat, but what that's going to do is decimate the producer population, and so eventually the primary consumers will also run out of food. So changes in one level of the food web can definitely affect other levels, and this ties in a lot to predation. Last up, we're going to discuss symbiosis, which are close and long-term relationships between two species. And so we have one, which is parasitism. One is going to benefit, one is going to hurt. One species, the parasite, is going to get nourishment from the host, which is harmed in the process. For instance, mosquitoes, they're taking our blood, and as a result, we're itchy. There's mutualism, where both species benefit from the relationship. It's positive for both. We often talk about clownfish and anemones, where clownfish find shelter and protection within the stinging tentacles of the anemone, while the anemone benefits from the clownfish's presence by being cleaned of parasites and also attracting prey. There's also commensalism, where one species will benefit, but the other, it's neutral. It's not going to be harmed and it's not going to be benefited. And so we can look here at barnacles on a whale. So barnacles get food from the whale, they get to ride on the whale, but the whale doesn't care, it's no detriment. So today we discuss communities. We discuss how to measure diversity of a community, but also all of the interspecific interactions within communities, such as competitions, such as niches, predation, trophic cascades, and lastly symbiosis, including mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. We'll see you in 8.6 to discuss biodiversity.